Today I'm joined by the Crops Extension Specialist of the Government of Saskatchewan, Tice Massish. He is here today to give us the final crop report of the 2024 growing season. And thank you so much for joining me today, Tice.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Thomas. It's good to be here.
So last time I did a crop report, Tice, we were just before the Saskatchewan election in October there, and most crop producers were finished harvesting. We're now into November, and so are all crop producers finished as of now for the final crop report?
The final crop report came out at the end of October, and at that point, our volunteer crop reporters reported that that harvest was 100% complete at that time. So there would have been like the few unharvested acres, but for the most part, all crops were off at that point. And now that it's been three going on 4 weeks since then, we all the crops in Saskatchewan should be off, just given the warm weather we've had the last few weeks.
And what are the overall yields looking like for Saskatchewan this year?
Yeah, crop yields were definitely an interesting story this year. So early in the growing season, we had a lot of wet conditions, which was kind of unexpected for the spring. So that left producers pretty optimistic with yields going into the fall. But then when July hit, there was very little rainfall and it was very hot, so that killed yield potential, especially for some of those later seeded crops like canola and mustard. So yields were a little disappointing overall for producers, just given the expectations they had earlier in their growing season from the moisture that they got. But overall, yeah, I would say it was an average year for most crops in Saskatchewan. Many of the crops like wheat, durum, um, peas, lentils, and quite a few others yielded slightly higher than our 5 and 10 year averages. And then crops like canola, oats, and barley, I believe, were slightly below those 10-year averages. But overall, it was an average year, and producers aren't really complaining too much about crop yields. And if you're looking for kind of like a regional breakdown, it crop yields followed the same trend that they usually do in Saskatchewan. The lowest yields were seen in the southwest, where it was very hot and dry for much of the growing season. And then in the northwest or northeast, sorry, and east central Saskatchewan, they received more rainfall up there, which they typically do, which resulted in them having a little bit higher crop yields than the rest of the province.
And then let's focus on us here in Lloydminster and in the Northwest region. How did we look for the 2024 growing season?
Yields are pretty again, they're pretty average with the provincial average for Saskatchewan, and they're very close to the 5 and 10 year averages. So overall, from what I've read, producers up there they're satisfied with their yields, but it definitely could have been better because, like most of the province, a week into July, the water just absolutely stopped coming. So it was crops really suffered from heat and drought stress during July and August.
And how are hay crops and pasture conditions for our livestock producers here in Saskatchewan?
When it came to like hay and forage crops, they actually did pretty well this year. They yielded a lot better than in 2023, because in 2023 it was dry pretty much the entire year, whereas the early season moisture really helped with those hay crops, since they're typically some of the first crops harvested. So producers reported anywhere from good to excellent hay yields in their first cut, and then some producers were able to get even a second cut and reported very good yields with those. And then they also reported pretty high quality hay as well. And since you're up in the northwest, the hay quality and yields up there were pretty strong from what producers were reporting, which is definitely a good sign. And producers are hoping that next year is going to be a similar situation to what we saw this year.
Finally, how important are these upcoming winter months as well as these early spring months coming up in 2025 for next year's growing season, especially after years upon years of less than ideal conditions?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Like you highlighted, we've had several years now in Saskatchewan where it's been very dry. And this year, again, we're off to a promising start with that early season moisture. And right now, that helped us to be where we're at right now as a province. We have some, or I guess topsoil moisture heading into the winter is around 50% adequate. It's probably a little lower now just with how dry it's been the last few weeks. But anyway, topsoil moisture going into this winter is a lot better than it was a year ago, which is at least producers a little more optimistic than they were last year. But still, it's going to be important that all areas of Saskatchewan get lots of heavy snow this winter, and that next spring prior to seeding that they get a lot of rainfall to kind of restore some of the soil moisture reserves, because there's still a lot of soils out there that are lacking moisture and could use a top up.
Thank you so much for all the information today, Tice, and we look forward to talking to you again next year about the 2025 crop season.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, and I'll talk to you next year.